Hi everyone, my name is Iuliia Avgustis. I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Oulu, and today I am presenting my paper titled Respecifying Phubbing, Video-Based Analysis of Smartphone Use in Co-Present Interactions. As smartphones become an integral part of people's daily lives and activities, researchers have raised concerns about the negative effects of pervasive smartphone use on the quality of face-to-face interactions. Hence the term phubbing, which is generally defined as a practice of ignoring co-present others by focusing on one's mobile device. Most existing studies on phubbing are based on quantitative methodology, which often fails to take the interactional context of smartphone use into account. There are relatively few studies that focus on individual self-initiated smartphone use in natural communication settings. The present study looks to fill this gap by exploring how individual smartphone use is initiated, carried out, and terminated by young adults in face-to-face encounters. More specifically, there are three goals of this study. Firstly, I discuss how the type of smartphone-based activity and the interactional context affect the way in which a particular instance of smartphone use is designed and oriented to by other participants. Secondly, instead of treating co-present others as victims of phubbing, I focus on the way the character of one's individual smartphone use is multimodally negotiated by all co-present participants. And lastly, this study investigates participants' practices of returning smartphone users back into conversations. Data collected for this study consists of 9 video recordings of naturally occurring interactions among young adults. Participants were recruited via flyers distributed at a large university in St. Petersburg. It was up to participants to choose whom and how many people to invite and where to meet. Recorded encounters involved 2 to 5 participants between the ages of 19 and 25. The study draws on multimodal interaction analysis that aims to reveal and describe how participants accomplish various social actions and activities. To ensure the adequacy and quality of recorded data, the study made use of a multidimensional video recording setup. Several cameras were used to capture the encounter as a whole, all participants were equipped with small wearable cameras, and screen capture software was used for each mobile device whenever technically possible. 72 instances of self-initiated individual smartphone use were categorized and analyzed for this study. I would like to begin by discussing the interactional context of self-initiated individual smartphone use. In the analyzed dataset, most instances of self-initiated smartphone use were preceded by participants' disengagement. For example, participants often reach for their phones during lapses in conversations, when a joint activity has ended and a new one has not yet begun, or when the other participant is not available for interactions. Other types of self-initiated smartphone use are smartphone use as a now relevant activity, for example, sharing the ongoing encounter via Instagram before the encounter ends. Smartphone use as a now or never activity, for example, photographing food before it is eaten. Smartphone use as a response to a summons, and here it is important to note that participants in the examined dataset often received messages, phone calls, and other notifications, but summonses were rarely responded to immediately. There were only 5 cases. And the last category is smartphone use as a means of avoiding conflict or awkward situations. For example, when a participant is being criticized for something, they can initiate smartphone use in order to suspend the ongoing interaction. So contrary to most previous research, the analysis reveals that disengagement often precedes self-initiated smartphone use rather than follows it. Another problem with current research on phubbing is the prevailing assumption that people focus either on the co-present interaction or on their device use. However, the analysis showed that participants can manage several concurrent activities without suspending interaction or problematizing smartphone use. While using their smartphones, participants can display their engagement or disengagement by altering their gaze orientations or bodily positions and configurations. However, even when displaying disengagement, participants do not ignore co-present others. Instead, they closely monitor others' actions, as the state of co-presence continuously proposes the relevance of a collaborative activity such as talk. Therefore, rather than assuming that the smartphone user's attention is either on the device or on the other participant, we should address it as a potentially dynamic process. Despite being an individual activity, one's smartphone use is also a collaborative achievement. Co-present participants can affect how one's smartphone use unfolds by going along with it, reciprocating it, or problematizing it. In the short excerpt presented below, the smartphone user answers a previously received message while also displaying her engagement to the co-present other by glancing at her and providing relevant responses. The co-present other, on her side, doesn't suspend storytelling and doesn't problematize smartphone use as she orients to these displays of engagement. The way multi-activity unfolds in this excerpt is therefore a collaborative achievement of both participants. This fragment also shows that many of the previous definitions of phubbing are too simplified, as smartphone users do not necessarily focus exclusively on their smartphones. Instead, the allocation of interactional resources is dynamic in nature. In most of the fragments from the dataset, smartphone use is not problematized by co-present others, and smartphone users return themselves back into the conversation either by joining the ongoing activity, initiating a new activity, or introducing a new topic based on their on-screen activity, for example, by describing the contents of the message they received. Co-present others can also attempt to return the smartphone user back into conversation, for example, by introducing a new topic not related to smartphone use, or by problematizing disengagement, for example, by saying, "No one listens to me." They can also introduce a new topic or activity based on their observed smartphone-based activity, for example, by saying, "Oh, are you also listening to this podcast?" And they can also directly ask the smartphone user about the activity in progress. Through these different ways of bringing smartphone users back, participants show their orientation to smartphone use as problematic, for example, when criticizing smartphone use, or not so problematic, for example, by initiating a new sequence related to what was observed on the user's screen. The participants' orientation to one's smartphone use as problematic or not depends on the type of on-screen activity, its duration, and the general interactional context. Phubbing can also be reciprocated by co-present others, and as a result, participants can enter and temporarily sustain a state of mutual disengagement or a smartphone break. Even during smartphone breaks, participants do not completely ignore each other, but they coordinate their disengagements and often monitor each other's availability. Smartphone breaks can be dissolved differently based on the interactional context that preceded them. If there is a person who is expected to talk prior to the emergence of a smartphone break, they are usually held responsible for resuming joint interaction. However, if smartphone breaks follow disengagement, smartphone users are left with no ongoing interactions to which they can return. In these situations, to restore a common interactional space, one of the phubbies, who is simultaneously a phubber, would have to return others. An example of such dissolution is presented below. In this excerpt, all participants are engaged in their individual smartphone-based activities for almost 20 seconds. Then one of the participants attempts to restore a common interactional space by sharing the content of a message he just received. Other participants then answer and lift their gazes up. They will then briefly discuss the message and continue talking after establishing a common interactional space. This excerpt shows how smartphones can not only constrain conversations but also enable them, as they can be used as resources for introducing new topics or activities. This study leads to several research and design implications. Firstly, it warns against relying on predetermined concepts when conducting research on technology use. Not every instance of smartphone use during co-present interactions can be considered phubbing, as the allocation of one's interactional resources between the ongoing interaction and the device use is dynamic in nature. Ignoring this aspect might lead to incorrect generalizations about the effects of smartphone use on the quality of face-to-face interactions. The study also showed that co-present participants can return smartphone users back into interactions, for example, by commenting on their on-screen activity. We should therefore consider designing technology that supports participants' own strategies for managing smartphone use and its potential negative effects. As smartphone screens are of low visibility due to their size, additional audio or video cues can be a good solution for increasing activity awareness for co-present others. As smartphones can both constrain and enable co-present interaction, we should design solutions that would not limit participants' opportunities to use technology as a resource for interaction. Smartphone users can enhance their co-present conversations by bringing new topics and activities based on their on-screen content. The strategy of restoring a common interactional space can be supported by technology that suggests various topics and activities that can be potentially relevant for co-present participants, based, for example, on the accounts they follow. Both solutions, however, raise additional privacy issues that must be addressed separately. A balance between privacy and the possible use of smartphones to enhance interactions should generally be considered when designing mobile technologies for collocated interactions.